All right, let's jump right in. We are tackling the final powerhouse chapter of what is, you could argue, the most famous speech ever given, the Sermon on the Mount. This is it. This is the grand finale, where everything comes together.
And it all builds up to these incredibly famous and, let's be real, kind of intimidating lines like this one. It's a verse that has had people thinking and maybe worrying a little for centuries.
So what does that even mean? What is this narrow path? To really get to the heart of it, we have to go way beyond just the surface. So let's break it down and see what's really going on here.
First things first, context is absolutely everything. Matthew chapter 7 is not just some random list of nice sayings. Nope, it's the intensely practical conclusion to a completely revolutionary teaching on how to actually live a life connected to God.
I mean, think about it. Jesus has just spent 2 whole chapters turning everyone's world upside down, talking about the poor in spirit being blessed and telling people to love their enemies. The most natural question from everyone listening on that hillside had to be, okay, this sounds amazing, but how in the world do we actually do this? Chapter 7 is the answer to that question.
So the chapter kicks off with 3 radical instructions, and each one is designed to challenge our most basic, gut-level instincts about how we deal with other people and with God.
It starts with that super famous line, "Judge not." But here's something fascinating. In the original Greek language, the verb tense here implies stopping an action that you're already doing. So the message isn't really never use your brain or have an opinion. It's much more like, hey, you know that habit you have of being constantly critical and condemning? Yeah, that. It's time to stop.
And to really drive this point home, Jesus uses an image that is so over the top, it's actually funny. The Greek word for what's in your eye, dokos, isn't a speck of dust or a splinter. It's a massive, construction-grade wooden beam. Just picture someone with a giant plank sticking out of their eye trying to perform delicate surgery on someone else's eye to get a speck out. The crowd would have laughed. They'd get the point instantly. Deal with your own giant problems first. All right, next, Jesus turns to prayer, but probably not in the way you'd expect. These 3 words, ask, seek, knock, they aren't just 3 different options you can pick from. The Greek actually shows an escalation, an increase in intensity. You start by asking, then you start searching like you've lost your keys, and then you start pounding on the door, relentlessly, like your life depends on it. This totally reframes what prayer is. It's not about putting a coin in a spiritual vending machine. It's the posture of someone who has finally realized they are desperately in need of help. Someone who knows for a fact that they cannot live this radical new way of life on their own. They need divine intervention. And then he bases this desperate kind of prayer in a radical new identity for God. You have to remember, for his audience, thinking of God as an intimately loving and providing Father who gives good things, well, that was a game changer. He was shifting their whole perspective from a distant, demanding God to a deeply personal one. And all of this flows perfectly into the 3rd instruction, the golden rule. This isn't just a random topic change. The logic is crystal clear. Once you truly understand how generously and graciously God the Father treats you, the only possible response is to turn around and treat other people that same way. His goodness to you becomes the blueprint for your goodness to them. Okay, so after explaining how to live this way, Jesus pivots. The tone shifts a bit. He starts giving a series of warnings that basically say, listen, this new life isn't something you just drift into. It requires a conscious, deliberate choice. It requires careful discernment. He presents this choice like a fork in the road. And that word narrow, here in the Greek, stenos, it literally means compressed or under pressure. So think about that. The narrow path isn't narrow because it's exclusive or because God wants to keep people out. It's narrow because it forces you to let go of all your baggage, your pride, your ego, your self-righteousness. The wide road, on the other hand, is easy. It's wide enough for you to bring all that junk along with you. And then he gives a super practical warning for the people listening. False spiritual leaders, false prophets, were a real and present danger. They look the part, they sound the part, they look like harmless sheep. But inwardly, their motivations are totally destructive. Which, of course, raises a really important question, right? How are you supposed to follow this command to be on the lookout for false teachers without violating that very first instruction he gave to not be judgmental? It's a great question, and Jesus answers it immediately. His answer is simple, and it's brilliant. It's an agricultural metaphor. He says, you don't judge the tree's inner worthiness. You just inspect its fruit. You look at the actual outcome of a person's life and their teaching. Is it producing good stuff?
Things like kindness, love, honesty. The call is to be a fruit inspector, not a hanging judge.
Now we get to one of the most sobering, maybe even scary parts of the entire sermon. Jesus talks about people who did amazing things, even miracles in his name, and they still get turned away. Why? Well, the key is in that word "knew." The Greek word used here, ginosko, doesn't mean intellectual knowledge, like knowing a fact. It means knowing someone through deep, personal, intimate experience. Jesus is basically saying, all that religious activity you did, it was disconnected from me. We never actually had a real relationship.
And all of this, every single warning and instruction, it all builds to one final, unforgettable story. Jesus ends his greatest sermon with a simple parable that ties everything together. This is the key that unlocks it all.
He talks about two builders, but here's the crucial part. Both builders hear the exact same words from Jesus. The only difference, the single variable between them, is what they do next. One of them hears the words and acts on them, doing the hard work of digging down to solid rock. The other one hears the exact same words, but ignores them and takes the easy way out, building on sand.
And you have to notice this. The storms come for both houses. The point is not that living this way means you avoid difficulty. Not at all. The point is that the storms of life are inevitable. They're not a question of if, they're a question of when. The only real question is whether your life is built on a foundation that can handle the storm.
As one analysis put it so well, the foundation you choose when life is easy determines whether you're still standing when everything shakes. That hard work of building a foundation, of actually putting these teachings into practice, that happens when the sun is shining. And that work is what decides if you survive when the storm finally hits. And the immediate result? The crowds were just blown away. You see, the religious teachers of their day would just quote other famous rabbis. They'd say, well, Rabbi so-and-so said this. But Jesus spoke with this direct, personal authority they had never ever heard before. He wasn't just interpreting the rules. He was speaking as the one who made them. And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway, the bottom line of this entire sermon. It isn't a new checklist of rules to make us all try harder. It's an invitation to build deeper, to construct our entire lives on the solid rock of not just hearing his words, but most importantly, doing them.
Which really leaves all of us with one final, unavoidable question to reflect on. When the inevitable storms of life come knocking, and they will, what foundation are you building on?